Hey everyone, Brick City Brown Chick coming at you with another episode. It is the week of July 7th, and today I wanted to talk about an old saying, Republicans, and a man named LaVar Ball. Now, last week, if you're a person that believes in freedom and democracy and civil rights, was absolutely horrendous in America. We got to watch the President of the United States talk about slavery and bringing back slavery. And no, he didn't use that actual word, but he might as well have. And we also got to watch Republicans running around gloating about the signing of the president's budget plan, which, in a nutshell, cuts Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, SNAP, Head Start, all of those programs, and puts that money into ICE and the Department of Defense. So it was just a horrendous week for many of us all around. And when I experience weeks like that, I really have to hearken back to a saying my mother used to say to me periodically when I was a child. Not frequently, because I was not a terrible child. I learned from my mistakes. When I made my parents angry, I learned that was something I shouldn't do again. But something my mother used to say that her mother used to say to her was, God don't like ugly. If that's an expression you've never heard, you didn't grow up in a black household, because every black child has heard that at some point. And you usually hear that when you do something to embarrass your parents or something to that effect. The first time I consciously remember hearing it was on my 10th birthday. My mother insisted, in the midst of this, on inviting a girl from down the street whose name I cannot remember for the life of me. I think I've blocked it out. But let's just call her Vicky for the sake of argument. Vicky was 3 years older than me, and she was what we now call and understand to be a bully. She did not like me. She did not like anything about me. And for the longest time, I could not figure out what the problem was. When I was 8 or 9, my mother sat me down to explain the circumstances of Vicky's life. Vicky lived on our street because she was being raised by her grandparents, the Johnsons. Her mother, who was the Johnsons' daughter, was a drug addict, and her father was in jail. So the Johnsons, who were well into their 60s when I was a young child, took in their granddaughter in an effort to raise her and help her be better than the people her parents became. She had a lot of resentment towards her parents and ultimately towards her grandparents, because she looked at them as the people who kept her away from their daughter, which was her mother. She was taken away from her mother when she was probably 9 or 10. So she had very clear memories of her mother. She wasn't an infant. So she hit that teenage rebellion phase with all of her anger and all of her resentment. And she was really hell on wheels. And some part of my mother, being the school teacher that she was and the oldest of 10 kids that she is, felt like she should do her part to try to help this child. So she would invite her to our house, and I, being the kid I was, would just be pouty and miserable because I knew this girl couldn't stand me. Now, Vicky was smart enough to only bully me and treat me badly when my mother wasn't around. So when she would leave and I would tell my mother about her behavior, my mother would say, "You don't understand what she's gone through, and you have so much more than she does. You have both your parents, you have a stable home, you don't want for anything, you've never felt abandoned by anyone." So my mother's speech to me was kind of like, suck it up, Buttercup, because she's going through a lot. My 10th birthday, I didn't want to hear any of it. I really didn't. And so when she invited Vicky to my birthday party, I was, for lack of a better expression, pissed off. I really was, because I was so tired of dealing with this girl who couldn't stand me, who would smile in my face and smile in my mother's face, but as soon as my mother turned her back or walked away, treated me like crap. So that was the day that I just had enough. And my mother had gone into the other room, and Vicky was picking on me and making fun of me. And I just hit the wall and I punched her. I didn't punch her in the face, I punched her in the arm because I was sick of it. And she fell on the floor and started to cry and just became this huge drama queen. So when my mother came back in the room, she asked what happened. And I flat out told her, I punched her because I've had it. And so my mother drags me out of the party into the other room, like grabs me by the arm and is like lecturing me and all this stuff. And finally she said, "You know, God sees everything you do, and God don't like ugly." That's my very first conscious memory of hearing that. Now, people always ask like how that story ends. Vicky stayed at the party. I ignored her. And when she went home, I said to my mother, I said, "If you ever invite her into this house again, I'll go up to my room and lock the door." And my mother just sort of glared at me with that, like, don't push it, little girl kind of look. But that was one of the times that I stood my ground and I was like, I am not inviting that girl into our home to treat me like crap. I don't care what she's been through. I don't care. And so that was kind of the end of the Vicky experiment, because I think my mother knew I was really serious, because I did not backtalk my mother. I was not one of those kids. I didn't call my mother out her name. I've never done that. So she knew that I was at my wit's end with the situation. So that's the first time I remember hearing God don't like ugly. The short explanation of that is exactly what she said. God sees everything you do and everything that happens. And if he sees something he disagrees with, he will take care of it. It will be taken care of. Maybe not in the time frame you want it to or under the circumstances you want it to, but it will be taken care of. Now, where am I going with this? This leads me into a modern day view of this situation, of that saying, with a man named LaVar Ball. Now, I'll give you a short background into who LaVar Ball is, but you really don't need a lot of details. He is a former athlete who had 3 sons with his wife. His wife's name is Tina. And he has always talked up his sons, whose names I can't remember. I know one is LaMelo, and I don't remember the other two. It's not really important. They all have L names. Like, they're all made in his image. And he always talks about how great they are, how amazing basketball players they are. And he said for years that they were going to take over the NBA. That has not happened. One of them plays in the G League. And if you don't know anything about basketball, the G League is like the minor leagues for baseball. Like they sent you to the G Leagues because you're not nearly as great as you think you are and you have more things to learn. One of them, last I heard, is playing for an NBA team, and the other one, I don't remember. He may be out of basketball entirely. But LaVar Ball is really a blowhard and a braggart. And he does interviews where, yes, he's talking about his sons, but he's mostly talking about himself and how great he is and how he runs his life. So, probably about a year ago, he was on an interview talking about his wife, Tina. Now, about a year before that, so about 2 years ago, Tina Ball had a stroke. And she had a stroke that nearly killed her. And as a consequence of the stroke, she now has a cane and has to walk slower and she talks slower and all those side effects you hear about when people have a stroke. And so the interviewer was asking him about his wife's recovery. And he was talking about how frustrated he was with how long it was taking her to recover and how she wasn't the woman she was before she had the stroke. And he used a specific example of the two of them going to a restaurant. So he drove them to the restaurant. They got out of the car and they are walking to the restaurant. They have to cross this major street. I guess they were in Los Angeles. And he said she was just really slow and lagging behind me with her cane. And I just got really frustrated and said, you need to move that leg and move your ass. And if you don't walk quicker, I'm just going to be in the restaurant waiting for you when you get there. And that's ultimately what he did. He got tired of it. He went into the restaurant, didn't wait on her, and she eventually came along. Now, as a wife myself, I find that incredibly offensive. If my husband did anything like that to me, gone. That is the most disrespectful thing I can imagine. This woman nearly died, and you don't have the patience to deal with the fact that she now has a cane and she has to take her time. You didn't understand that part of the vow of in sickness and in health, did you? But I'm off topic. So I read a couple of weeks ago, I guess I haven't been paying attention, that earlier this year, LaVar Ball had to have one of his legs amputated because of, at the time, they said medical complications. But when I heard it, my first thought was diabetes, because that's usually why people have to have limbs removed. And ultimately, I was correct. It's because of diabetes. He got a foot infection and it festered, and they ended up having to take his leg. Now, my immediate thought when I heard that was hearing my mother in my head. God don't like ugly. He was ugly and nasty to his wife about her being slow and not being able to keep up with him. And God said, okay, I've got a fix for that. And that's what happened. Now, why am I telling that particular story? That is how I had to come to terms with the end of last week. I really did have to have a sit down with myself and say, all of this terrible evil that is happening in this country will end. It will have to end. because at some point, God is going to say, I don't like ugly. You are deporting people. You are taking away resources from the poor, the sick, the elderly, the children. You are going against literally 9 of the 10 commandments. There will be a debt to pay for that. And you don't have to be a overly or psychotically religious person to understand that. You can call it karma. You can call it evening the score. You can call it the universe. You can call it revenge. You can call it God's plan. You can call it whatever you want to. But understand that the people who are being burdened and mistreated and thought of as trash will have their revenge. I grew up Catholic. One of the tenets of the Catholic Church is the 8 Beatitudes. And one of the 8 Beatitudes is, blessed are the tired and the poor and the weary, for they shall inherit the earth. And I do this episode not as a tremendously religious person. I believe very strongly in a higher power, but I think organized religion is one of those things that tears people apart, not brings them together. But because I believe in a higher power, I know that a higher power is going to step in and maybe not resolve all of this, but make it better than it's going to be. So this week, I ask everybody who is feeling downtrodden and devastated and upset by what is happening in America to remember, God don't like ugly. I want to thank you all for listening this week. If you are not subscribed to the podcast, there is a button down here below my head. Please subscribe and hit the notification button so that you know whenever I post new episodes. I post at least once a week. Sometimes there's a couple more short episodes, but I will be here weekly, always on Fridays. So everybody have a great week, and I will talk to you again soon. Bye-bye.